They tell you to plan your life like you're building a skyscraper. Every beam calculated, every joint secured, every floor building perfectly on the one below. I had a blueprint. Law school, top of my class, internship at the best firm in Chicago. It was all there, a perfect, logical ascent to the top. My defining moment, I thought, would be a perfectly crafted closing argument. A brilliant legal strategy that would make my career, that would finally prove I belonged. That was the blueprint. That was the plan. But life isn't a skyscraper. It's a game of Jenga. You can plan every single move with surgical precision, but you never, ever know which tiny, insignificant piece will be the one to bring the whole thing crashing down around you. For me, it wasn't a flawed legal argument or a missed deadline. It was a single, loose thread on a Persian rug, and the sound of a millionaire's bespoke trousers ripping from seam to seam. In front of everyone. That should have been the end of my story, the punchline to a very short, very sad joke. But what I didn't know then, what nobody tells you about the moments that break you, is that some aren't endings. They're explosions. They obliterate the life you so carefully planned to make room for the one that's been waiting for you in the rubble. My name is Anne Vance, and this is the story of my rubble. I always believed my life would be defined by quiet achievements, a perfectly argued brief, a meticulously researched case file. I never imagined it would be defined by the sound of tearing fabric. It started, as most of my catastrophes did, with a misplaced sense of optimism. My desk, a small beige rectangle crammed into the intern bullpen, was my island in a sea of ambition. That morning, I'd managed to organize my case notes into a system that was, in my humble opinion, a work of art. "Don't look so pleased with yourself, Vance," Maya whispered from the adjacent desk, not looking up from her screen. Maya was my fellow intern, a girl with impossibly sharp blazers and an even sharper tongue, who navigated the treacherous waters of sterling and sterling with the ease of a born predator. Smugness is a tell. They smell it on you, they think you have free time. "It's not smugness, it's organizational bliss," I retorted, tapping my color-coded folders. Her lips quirked into a half-smile. "Whatever helps you sleep at night." She suddenly froze, her eyes fixed on something over my shoulder. The air in the bullpen crackled and went still. It was a phenomenon I'd come to recognize, the Kalen's sterling proximity effect. All chatter ceased, keyboards softened to a timid tiptoe, and everyone became intensely focused on their work. I didn't need to turn around to know he was there. Reese Dalton, a senior associate with teeth as white as his ambition, was walking a half-step behind him, his posture radiating a sycophantic eagerness. "Vance," Dalton's voice cut through the silence, sharp and dismissive. "Mister, Sterling needs the final Ishikawa file. Now, conference room A." He dropped a thick, crimson folder onto my desk. It was marked with a single, ominous word, priority. My heart did a painful lurch against my ribs. The Ishikawa Corporation. The White Whale, a multi-billion-dollar merger that was rumored to be on shaky ground. "Yes, of course," I managed, my voice sounding breathy and weak. Maya gave me a look that was equal parts pity and warning. "Don't trip," she mouthed silently. Famous last words. The journey to conference room was a walk through a gauntlet of my own anxieties. The hallway was lined with portraits of stern-faced men, all named Sterling, their oil-painted eyes seeming to judge my worn-out flats, and the nervous sweat prickling at my hairline. I clutched the crimson folder to my chest like a shield. It wasn't just a file. It was my one, infinitesimal chance to be something other than the scholarship kid who felt perpetually out of place. Conference room was the firm's crown jewel, a glass cage overlooking the sprawling chaos of Chicago. Inside, the firm's titans were assembled around a monolithic mahogany table, and at the head of it, Kalen Sterling. He was everything the legends said, impossibly handsome in that severe, intimidating way, with dark hair and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He was in the process of standing to greet the Ishikawa executives, a delegation of older Japanese men in identical dark suits. My mistake was trying to be invisible. In a room where every movement was a calculated display of power, my attempt at self-effacement was a fatal flaw. I hugged the wall, aiming for the credenza where I could deposit the file without disrupting the flow of billion-dollar handshakes. But my worn-out flats, the sensible shoes I'd bought for their practicality, betrayed me. The rubber sole caught on the knotted fringe of a ridiculously plush Persian rug. Time seemed to warp, stretching and slowing. The crimson folder flew from my grasp, arcing through the air in a perfect, tragic parabola. Papers erupted from it, a snowstorm of legal jargon and financial projections fluttering down into the suffocatingly silent room. My arms pinwheeled wildly. My hands shot out, grasping, desperate for purchase on anything solid to stop my fall. They found the waistband of Mr. Sterling's bespoke wool trousers. My internal monologue wasn't a monologue. It was a single, high-pitched, sustained scream that I was sure everyone in the room could hear. I felt the sharp pop of a button under my fingers, a sound as loud and final as a gunshot. It was followed by a sickening, ripping sound like tearing silk that echoed in the sudden, tomb-like silence. The trousers didn't just rip. A seam gave way, a catastrophic failure from the belt loop all the way down to his knee. For one horrifying, crystal-clear second, the entire room was treated to a view of Kalen Sterling's boxer briefs, a surprisingly whimsical navy blue dotted with tiny, embroidered anchors. My hand was still clenched in a fistful of expensive wool, my knuckles stark white against the dark fabric. The world came rushing back in muted horror. The Ishikawa executives, paragons of decorum, were frozen with identical expressions of polite, controlled shock. Reese Dalton, who had been wearing a triumphant smirk at my initial stumble, now looked as if he'd just witnessed a public execution. My execution. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror, because my failure was now reflecting on him, on the firm, on everything. I expected Kalen Sterling to obliterate me. I'd read the internal memos about his legendary temper, his zero-tolerance policy for incompetence. His stormy eyes locked onto mine, and the air crackled with a palpable charge. This was it. The end. I braced for the verbal evisceration that would end my career before it had even begun, a story they'd tell to scare future interns for decades. But then he did the last thing I ever expected. Without breaking his intense gaze on me, a look that was simultaneously dissecting and dismissing me, he turned his head smoothly toward the stunned executives. "My apologies, gentlemen," he said, his voice a low, calm baritone that betrayed not a single shred of humiliation. The control in it was absolute. "It seems my new intern is a firm believer in aggressive textile stress testing." A few of the junior associates behind him choked. "It's a new Sterling and Sterling initiative," he continued, the corner of his mouth twitching in something that was decidedly not a smile. "To ensure our sartorial standards are as rigorous as our legal ones." He then placed a hand with deliberate casualness over the gaping tear, holding his pants in place, and gestured with his chin toward Reese. "Dalton, please escort MS. Vance to my office and have her wait. We'll continue this discussion in a moment." He made it sound like a planned demonstration. A bizarre, insane, but planned event. He took a moment of pure, unadulterated chaos and, with a few carefully chosen words, twisted it into a bizarre display of corporate strategy. He didn't save me. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this wasn't about saving me. It was about power. He absorbed my catastrophic failure into his own narrative of unassailable control. Reese was on me in a second, his fingers digging into my upper arm like talons. "Let's go," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper meant only for me, as he practically dragged me from the room. Past the scattered papers and the stunned faces, I realized the shock in the room wasn't about the ripped pants anymore. It was about the man who wore them. And I was now inextricably, horrifyingly, linked to him. Reese Dalton's grip on my arm was bruising as he marched me down the hallowed halls of Sterling and Sterling. The portraits of the firm's founders seemed to sneer, their oil-painted lips curled in silent condemnation. My career, all of 3 weeks old, was a flickering candle in a hurricane, and Reese was the wind. His office. "Don't touch anything," he snarled, shoving me through a pair of imposing oak doors and pulling them shut behind me, the click of the latch sounding like a cell door locking. Waiting in Kaylin Sterling's office felt like sitting in a beautifully appointed execution chamber. The room was a monument to power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's eye view of the Chicago skyline. A desk of polished obsidian looked like a sacrificial altar, and a single, hauntingly beautiful white orchid stood in a minimalist vase, its perfection a stark contrast to my chaotic existence. I sank into a leather chair that sighed under my weight, the scent of expensive leather and something clean and masculine, his scent filling my senses. I spent 47 minutes, timed by the silent sweep of a clock that had no numbers, replaying the incident. Each mental rerun was more excruciating than the last. The slow-motion fall, the explosion of paper, the feel of the tearing fabric beneath my desperate fingers. I had not only humiliated the CEO, I had potentially torpedoed a billion-dollar merger. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a lifeline to the outside world. It was Chloe, my best friend and roommate. "Chloe, Suo, are you a legal eagle yet? Or did you accidentally staple your sleeve to a senior partner?" My thumbs trembled as I typed. "Me, worse. Much, much worse. I think my career just died." Chloe, OMG what, details. Now, me, ripped the CEO's pants, in front of the Ishikawa board. The 3 dots indicating she was typing appeared and disappeared 3 times. "Chloe, you what? Please tell me you're joking. Were they ugly pants? Did you do the world a favor?" Me, they were probably Italian, and I saw his underwear. They had little anchors on them. Chloe, anchors, see? A man with anchor underwear can't be all bad. It shows a whimsical side. Maybe he'll find it charming. Me, he has the charm of a viper, Chloe. I'm waiting in his office to be fired. I should start packing up my desk in my head. I was cataloging my meager belongings. The ergonomic mousepad I'd splurged on, my collection of perfectly sharpened pencils, the small photo of my parents when the door opened. He walked in, now wearing a different pair of identical, flawless charcoal trousers. The man clearly had a uniform. He didn't look at me, his focus absolute as he strode to the expansive windows, his back to me. He clasped his hands behind his back and stared out at the city as if he owned it. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken judgment. I could hear my own heart hammering against my ribs. "MS. Vance," he began finally, his voice dangerously soft, a low rumble that vibrated through the quiet room. "In your opinion, what is the single most valuable asset at this firm?" I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly as dry as parchment. My mind raced. "Our reputation, our history, our legal talent," I went with the most obvious answer. Our clients, sir." He shook his head, a small dismissive gesture. "Wrong," he said. "It's perception. The perception of unassailable strength, of meticulous, unwavering control. Today you took a sledgehammer to that perception." I flinched as if he'd struck me. "I am so sorry, sir," I whispered, the words feeling utterly inadequate. "It was an accident. I can't even begin to. I'm not interested in your apologies." He cut in, finally turning to face me. His eyes were cold, analytical, stripping away all my defenses. I'm interested in why I shouldn't walk you to the elevator myself and make sure your access card is deactivated before you reach the ground floor. This was it, the moment of truth. My survival instincts, honed by years of clawing my way through scholarships and competitive programs, kicked in. The panic receded, replaced by a strange, sharp clarity. I took a shaky breath, meeting his gaze. Because the accident was a result of a flaw in the environment, not a flaw in my work, I stated, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. The Persian rug in conference room has a raised, reinforced edge. It's a known tripping hazard. There are 2 incident reports filed about it in the facility's log from the last quarter. I reviewed them during my orientation. His expression didn't change, but a flicker of something, surprise, intrigue, passed through the stormy depths of his eyes. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "You reviewed the facility's logs?" he asked, his tone laced with disbelief. "I review everything," I confirmed, lifting my chin slightly. The orientation packet included a link to all non-confidential internal logs. It's how I understand a system, where its weaknesses are, and the system, in this case, has a physical flaw. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could almost see the gears turning in his brilliant, calculating mind. He was reassessing me, looking past the clumsy intern who had just cost him a fortune and seeing something else, a fellow analyst. "The Ishikawa deal is dead," he said flatly, the words landing like stones. "They've officially withdrawn. Your accident gave them the perfect excuse to pull out. They were looking for one. They believe this firm has lost its edge since my father's passing." The mention of his father was heavy with unspoken meaning, a brief crack in his armor. "They see me as a weak successor. You just handed them the proof on a silver platter." He turned from me and walked to a built-in bookshelf that held rows of pristine, leather-bound volumes. From the very bottom shelf, he pulled out a thick, dusty binder, blowing a small cloud of dust from its cover. He dropped it on the obsidian desk in front of me with a heavy, final thud. The faded gold lettering on the spine read, "Beaumont et al. v. Titan Energy." "This is the Beaumont case," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "It's a pro bono file that's been sitting in the archives for 3 years. A land rights dispute for a small community in Appalachia against a corporate giant. We've lost every preliminary motion. It's a dead case, a professional graveyard." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk, caging me in with his presence. "You have 1 week," he commanded. "Review this and find something, anything, that 4 senior partners have missed. If you can't, you're gone. If you can, you'll continue your internship in the archives." Sub-basement level, away from clients, trousers, and expensive rugs, is that clear? It wasn't a reprieve. It was a different kind of death sentence. A test designed for failure. He was exiling me, giving me an impossible task to justify to himself or to others, not firing me outright. I was left alone in the silent, cavernous office, the weight of his judgment pressing down on me. My eyes fell to the dusty binder. It was a tombstone marking the end of my career. The question was, why? Why this elaborate, cruel charade instead of a simple termination? With trembling fingers, I opened the binder. The first page was a sign-out sheet. A list of names from 3 years ago was crossed out, but below them there was one last entry, dated just over a year ago. The signature was elegant, confident, and utterly unmistakable. Kalen Sterling, S.R. Kalen's father, the legendary founder of the firm, had been the last person to touch this dead case, and according to the date, it was the day before he died. My descent into the sub-basement felt deeply symbolic. Each floor the elevator passed was a step down in the corporate hierarchy, from the sun-drenched executive suites to the bustling associate floors, until it finally opened with a mournful ding into a world devoid of natural light. The archives at Sterling and Sterling were located in a climate-controlled purgatory of rolling metal shelves, the air cold and dry, smelling of aging paper and forgotten ambitions. The only sounds were the persistent hum of a dehumidifier and the occasional high-pitched squeal of a metal wheel on a track. Sal, the firm's archivist, a man who looked as if he'd been catalogued and stored here himself sometime in the last century, pointed me to a small metal desk in the corner. It was wedged between a shelf of 1970s tax law and another dedicated to defunct corporate bylaws. A single fluorescent tube overhead flickered erratically, casting my new workspace in a sickly, pulsating light. This was my exile. "This is where cases come to die, kid," Sal remarked, his voice a gravelly rasp. He gave me a look that was less unkind than it was weary, the look of a man who had seen dozens of bright-eyed young lawyers get chewed up by the firm. "Don't let it take you with it." The Beaumont case file was even worse than I'd imagined. It was a legal quagmire, a David vs. Goliath story where Goliath had a fleet of tanks and David had a broken slingshot. The binder contained hundreds of pages detailing the plight of a small, rural community in the hollows of Appalachia, being forced off land their families had lived on for generations. They were being sued by Titan Energy, a massive conglomerate who claimed exclusive mineral rights based on a century-old contract signed by a barely literate ancestor. The file was filled with heartbreaking, black-and-white photos of the families, their faces etched with a mixture of defiance and despair. For the first 2 days, I felt the crushing weight of that despair. I read through the meticulous work of the 4 senior partners who had handled the case before me. They were brilliant. They had argued every possible angle: adverse possession, historical precedent, environmental impact, faulty contract execution, and every single argument had been systematically, flawlessly dismantled by Titan's army of lawyers. Kalen Sterling hadn't given me a test. He'd given me a shovel and told me to dig my own grave. That night, hunched over my tiny apartment desk, I texted Chloe, "Me, it's hopeless. They covered every base. The partners before me were geniuses. There's nothing here. Chloe, nothing is ever truly nothing, and you see patterns no one else does. Remember that programming comp in college? You found a flaw in the source code everyone said was perfect." Me, this isn't code, Chloe. It's law. It's precedent stacked on precedent. I'm the girl who ripped the CEO's pants, and now I'm being punished by being forced to fail in slow motion. The familiar, bitter sting of imposter syndrome coiled in my stomach. I didn't belong here. I was a scholarship kid from a state school, a rounding error in a firm populated by Ivy League legacies. But on the 3rd day, something shifted. The despair curdled into a hard, cold knot of anger. I was rereading a deposition from the lead plaintiff, an elderly woman named Martha Beaumont, her words full of a quiet, unshakable dignity. The sheer injustice of it all ignited something in me. I was angry at Kalen for this cruel, manipulative charade. I was angry at Titan Energy for their predatory bullying. But most of all, I was angry at myself for almost giving up. My eyes kept drifting to the photocopy of the sign-out sheet I'd made. Kalen Sterling, SR. Why would a man of his stature review this hopeless case the day before he died? He wasn't looking to close a file. He was looking for something. I stopped looking at the case as a whole and started breaking it down, document by document, footnote by footnote. I wasn't just a lawyer anymore. I was a systems analyst. I turned my metal desk and the wall behind it into a chaotic war room. I printed copies of every key document, taping them to the cold concrete, connecting deeds to depositions with colored yarn. I built a meticulous timeline, from the first signed contract in 1908 to the most recent failed motion. I cross-referenced everything with public records, petitioning dusty courthouse basements in West Virginia for original land surveys and county deeds. Late on the fourth night, fueled by lukewarm coffee from a vending machine, my eyes burning from the flickering light, I found it. It wasn't in the elegant legal arguments or the complex case law. It was buried in the appendix of an appendix. A grainy, scanned copy of a 1920s geological survey, attached as a minor exhibit. A tiny, almost illegible footnote from the original surveyor read, "Note, significant magnetic anomaly in northern parcel suggests equipment malfunction. Readings disregarded." Equipment malfunction. A convenient explanation. But it snagged in my brain, a loose thread in a seemingly perfect weave. On a hunch, I used my dwindling personal savings to pay for a subscription to a satellite imaging service and access to a declassified federal geological database. I pulled up the coordinates of the Beaumont property. The modern magnetometric data lit up my screen. The anomaly wasn't a malfunction. It was a massive, concentrated, deep earth deposit. My hands trembled as I cross-referenced the magnetic signature with a geological composition library. It wasn't iron. It wasn't coal. It was a unique signature consistent with a group of elements: neodymium, dysprosium, terbium, rare earth minerals, the building blocks of modern technology, smartphones, electric cars, military guidance systems. Titan Energy wasn't after coal or natural gas, as they'd claimed in every single legal filing. They were after a treasure trove worth billions. My blood turned to ice water. I frantically pulled out the original 1908 contract. My finger traced along the brittle, yellowed paper to the section on mineral rights. It granted Titan's predecessor the rights to excavate any and all hydrocarbon and carbon-based mineral substances. Coal, oil, natural gas, rare earth elements or metals. The entire legal foundation of their multi-million-dollar, multi-year lawsuit was a deliberate, calculated lie. A jolt of pure adrenaline shot through me, so intense it made me gasp. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild, triumphant beat against the oppressive silence of the archives. I hadn't just found a loophole. I hadn't just found a mistake. I had found a massive, far-reaching conspiracy. The dead case was suddenly very, very much alive. It was a ticking bomb, and I was the only one who had heard the clock start. The discovery felt like holding a live grenade. The initial, brilliant flash of adrenaline faded, replaced by the heavy, cold weight of the thing in my hands. The pin was out. My first instinct was a primal, lawyerly urge. Run to the authority figure, present the evidence, and let the system handle it. Run straight to Kalen Sterling's office and lay the bombshell on his obsidian desk. But I hesitated. The oppressive silence of the archives, once a symbol of my exile, now felt like a necessary shield. My internal analysis of the situation was a chaotic whirlwind of paranoia and strategy. The central, glaring question echoed in my mind. Why would four of the sharpest legal minds at a firm like this miss something so fundamental? The distinction between carbon-based minerals and metallic elements wasn't some obscure legal loophole. It was a textbook definition. It was too big, too clean, too obvious of an oversight. Was it incompetence on a staggering institutional level, or was it intentional? The thought sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the sub-basement's climate control. Was Sterling and Sterling somehow complicit in this fraud? Was Kalen's impossible task not a test of my abilities, but a carefully designed labyrinth with a predetermined dead end, a way to bury me and this case for good? I couldn't shake the suffocating feeling that I was a pawn in a much larger, much older game. The signature of Kalen Sterling, SR, at the bottom of that sign-out sheet felt less like a clue and more like a warning. I decided I needed more proof before I approached anyone, especially the man whose motives were a complete black box. I packed the core findings into my bag, leaving my war room of yarn and paper taped to the wall as a decoy, and retreated to the relative safety of my apartment. For the next 2 days, my life split in two. By day, I was the diligent, defeated intern, dutifully reading through stacks of irrelevant case law in the archives. By night, my shoebox apartment became a clandestine operations center. "You look like you're about to bring down a government," Chloe remarked one evening, eyeing the tangle of charging cables and the glow of my triple-monitored laptop setup. "Just some deep-dive research for the firm," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. I wanted to tell her everything, but I couldn't. I didn't know who might be listening. She said, unconvinced. "Well, just so you know, big things in places like that usually have big teeth. Watch your back, Anne." Using a series of VPNs and encrypted browsers, I created a shell company online, Appalachian Strategic Resources, LLC. I built a plausible, if generic, website and used my newly minted corporate identity to request publicly available prospecting reports from Titan Energy's investor relations portal. The reports that came back were heavily redacted, but what they hid was just as telling as what they showed. Entire sections on geological composition were blacked out, citing proprietary methods. It was the corporate equivalent of a giant, flashing neon sign that read, "Secret here." The real breakthrough came when I started investigating Titan's corporate structure. It was a Russian nesting doll of subsidiaries and holding companies. I spent an entire night meticulously tracing property deeds filed in West Virginia over the past 20 years. The pieces started to fit together with sickening clarity. Titan, under at least a dozen different subsidiary names, had been acquiring smaller, seemingly worthless parcels of land all around the Beaumont property. When I printed out a county map and started highlighting the lots in red, a perfect, suffocating perimeter formed around the rare earth mineral deposit. This wasn't just a lawsuit, it was a multi-decade corporate siege, a slow, methodical strangulation. The most damning piece of evidence, the one that tied it all back to the heart of my own firm, came from a deep dive into an academic database of historical newspapers. I was searching for information on Titan's founder when a tangentially related article from a 1985 business journal caught my eye. The headline was innocuous: "Sterling Trust funds Appalachian geological study." The article detailed a philanthropic endeavor, a private research project to map the geological resources of the region. The head of that private trust? Kalen Sterling, SR. My blood ran cold. I read the sentence again and again. Sterling and Sterling hadn't just missed the details. The firm's legendary founder had known about the minerals decades ago. A storm of questions crashed over me. Why would he not act on it? Why fund the research and then bury the findings? Why let the Beaumont case, the very key to that land, be designated pro bono and left to die in the archives? Armed with this final, terrifying piece of the puzzle, I went back to the office late that night to print the article on the high-quality laser printer, my own inkjet feeling too flimsy for such a monumental piece of evidence. The archives were deserted, the flickering fluorescent light humming my only companion. As the printer whirred, spitting out the page, I heard the soft squeak of expensive loafers on the concrete floor. My head snapped up. Reese Dalton was standing at the entrance to my section, leaning against a metal shelf with feigned casualness. A smug, predatory smile played on his lips. "Still playing in the dirt, Vance?" He sneered, his eyes flicking over my makeshift wall of evidence. "I heard Sterling gave you the Beaumont file. That's his special brand of corporate euthanasia. He gives people impossible tasks to watch them break. I quickly gathered my papers, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Just finishing up for the night," I said, my voice tight. He pushed off the shelf and took a slow step closer, his presence feeling invasive in my small workspace. "You know, a word of advice," he said, his voice dropping to a confidential, menacing tone. "Some rocks are better left unturned, especially around here. It can be hazardous to your career." It wasn't advice, it was a threat, and in his eyes I saw a flicker of something that wasn't just arrogance, it was knowledge. He knew I was onto something. How? Was he monitoring my research? Was he involved? The grenade in my hands, the one I'd been so carefully guarding, suddenly felt like it was about to explode. I realized I couldn't trust anyone, not Sal, not Maya, and definitely not Reese. My web of paranoia snapped into a single, terrifying certainty. I was being watched. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to bury the research and beg for my job. But the image of Martha Beaumont's dignified face, the thought of Kaylin Sterling S.R.'s mysterious signature, and the pure, naked threat in Reese Dalton's eyes solidified into a hard resolve. I couldn't back down now. There was only one person in this entire building with enough power to fight what was coming, and whose own legacy was now inextricably tied to this conspiracy. It was the biggest gamble of my life, a leap of faith into a raging storm. I gathered my files, my hands steady now with purpose. I walked past a stunned Reese without a word, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I headed straight for the elevator at the end of the hall and pressed the button, not for the ground floor, but for the one at the very top. The penthouse. The elevator ride to the penthouse was the longest 60 seconds of my life. With each floor it climbed, the pressure in my ears built, a physical manifestation of the crushing weight of the files in my satchel. I rehearsed my opening statement in my head, a frantic, silent monologue, trying to anticipate every possible reaction. Fury, dismissal, a cold, quiet call to security. The polished brass doors slid open with a soft, final ding, revealing the hushed, cavernous reception area of the executive suite. It was empty. The entire floor was dark, save for the single line of light seeping from under Kaylin Sterling's office doors. He was still here. My footsteps were swallowed by the plush, ridiculously expensive carpet as I approached. I didn't knock. I pushed the heavy oak door open. He was standing at the window, much like he had on the day of my sentencing, a dark silhouette against the glittering tapestry of the Chicago night. He didn't turn, but I saw his reflection in the glass, his eyes narrowed. "The archive's close at 9 ms. Vance," he said, his voice a low, cold thing that held no welcome. "Whatever it is, it can wait until morning." "No, sir," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I don't think it can." That made him turn. He took in my determined stance, the heavy satchel slung over my shoulder. Annoyance hardened his features. "This had better be important." "I believe it is," I said. Presenting my findings to Kaylin Sterling was the second most terrifying moment of my internship. I walked to the center of the room, to that vast, gleaming obsidian desk, and began to unload the contents of my bag. It felt like I was laying out the components of a bomb. I spread out the county maps, the highlighted property deeds forming their sinister perimeter around the Beaumont land. I laid down the redacted Titan Energy reports next to the unredacted geological data I'd paid for myself. I placed the grainy printout of the 1985 newspaper article, the one with his father's name, in the very center. I spoke for 20 minutes straight. I didn't stammer. The fear had been burned away by adrenaline and a righteous, simmering anger. I didn't just present the facts. I wove them into a narrative of deception, of a multi-decade corporate siege built on a single, fundamental lie. And then, taking a deep breath, I walked him through my discovery of the trust his father had funded. I didn't accuse. I simply presented the timeline, the connections, the impossible questions it raised. I was essentially accusing the founder of the firm of either gross negligence or a massive cover-up, right to his son's face. When I finished, he was silent. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the city below. He walked over to the desk, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He didn't look at the maps or the reports. His eyes were fixed on the article about his father. He picked it up, and I saw his knuckles turn white as his grip tightened on the page. I watched his jaw clench, a muscle feathering in his cheek. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, I thought he was going to call security, to have me thrown out for this outrageous heresy. Instead, he turned, walked to a sleek, concealed private bar in the wall, and took out a heavy crystal decanter and 2 glasses. He poured a generous measure of amber liquid into each. The scent of peated whiskey filled the air. He walked back and handed one of the glasses to me. My fingers were trembling so hard I was afraid I'd drop it. My father wasn't covering it up, he said, his voice low and strained, raw with an emotion I couldn't place. He stared into his glass as if seeing a ghost. He was protecting it. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. He knew about the minerals. He found out during that geological study in the 80s. He bought the original land trust that held the Beaumont property through a blind acquisition specifically to keep corporations like Titan away from it. He believed the community, the people who had lived on that land for 200 years, should be the sole beneficiaries. He took a slow, deliberate sip of whiskey. Setting the case as pro bono, staffing it with our best, and then letting it stall in our archives, that was his way of creating a legal fortress around it, a perpetual stalemate, a fortress that would only hold as long as no one knew what was really there. He took another long swallow of his whiskey. Titan's new CEO is aggressive, reckless. He must have found out somehow and is making a move. And Reese Dalton, he paused, his eyes hardening. His father, Marcus Dalton, was a junior partner here. My father forced him out for unethical practices, for putting profits before clients. Reese has always believed his family was wronged. The pieces clicked into place with an audible snap in my mind. This wasn't just corporate espionage. This was a legacy battle, a ghost war fought across generations. Reese must be leaking information to Titan, I whispered, the realization dawning. Kalen nodded grimly. I've suspected he was a snake for years, but I never had proof. He's ambitious and he carries a grudge. He's been positioning himself, waiting for a chance to strike at my father's legacy, to prove his father was the one who was right. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the mask of the untouchable CEO fall away completely. In its place, I saw a man fighting a war on multiple fronts, burdened by his father's secrets, surrounded by enemies he couldn't see. You weren't just a clumsy intern, were you, Ms. Vance? He said, a hint of a wry, tired smile on his lips. You're a weapon. He swirled the whiskey in his glass. And I was testing you. I admit it. When my father died, he left me a note with this case file number on it. Nothing else. I knew it was important, but I didn't know why. I needed someone outside the firm's political structure, someone with no preconceived notions, to look at this with fresh eyes. He took a step closer. The pants incident, it was a disaster, but in the middle of that chaos, you didn't cry or crumble. You tried to reason your way out of it, citing facilities logs. You analyzed the system's failure instead of your own. You were an anomaly. He looked me straight in the eye, his gaze intense. I can't officially put you on this case. Dalton and others on the board, like my uncle Orion Sterling, would be immediately suspicious. We need to work on this in secret, off the books. It will be dangerous. Reese will not make it easy for us if he finds out what you know. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Are you in? My personal commentary was simple. I was terrified. But beneath the fear, a hot, thrilling current of exhilaration was rising. This was it. This was why I became a lawyer, not for the money or the prestige, but for the fight. "I'm in," I said, my voice firm and clear, but on one condition. He raised a single, questioning eyebrow. "Call me Anne." He held my gaze for a long moment, a slow nod of understanding passing between us. A genuine, unguarded smile touched his lips for the first time. "Kaylin," he said, "and Anne, welcome to the real Sterling and Sterling." Our secret alliance transformed my life into a study in contradictions. By day, I was the exiled intern, the ghost of the sub-basement. I learned to ignore the pitying glances from other interns and the triumphant, knowing smirks Reese Dalton would shoot my way whenever he deigned to visit the lower levels. I'd sit at my flickering metal desk, cataloging dusty files, a human symbol of a career in freefall. Sal, the archivist, would occasionally leave a cup of surprisingly decent coffee on my desk without a word, his expression a mixture of gruff sympathy and something else, something that looked almost like anticipation. By night, I was a clandestine legal operative. The moment I left the imposing glass and steel of the Sterling and Sterling Tower, I became a different person. My world shrank to the glowing screen of an encrypted laptop in my cramped apartment and the hushed, charged meetings with Kaylin. We communicated through a secure messaging app he'd installed on a burner phone he'd given me, our exchanges terse and tactical. Our meetings were stolen moments in the shadows of the city. Late nights in his locked office, the skyline a silent, glittering witness, were for intense, sleeves-rolled-up strategy sessions. We'd argue over obscure legal precedents, the air crackling with an intellectual energy that was more potent than any caffeine. Early mornings, before the city was truly awake, we'd meet at a nondescript coffee shop miles from the loop called the Daily Grind, a place that smelled of burnt coffee and anonymity, to discuss our next moves in low voices. The dynamic was electric. In those moments, we were simply Kaylin and Anne. The staggering power imbalance of CEO and intern vanished, replaced by a shared purpose and a palpable chemistry. I saw the man behind the myth, the way he'd rub the back of his neck when a legal theory frustrated him, the almost boyish flash of excitement in his eyes when I'd connect two disparate pieces of evidence. He, in turn, seemed to look at me not as the clumsy girl who'd humiliated him, but as a strategic partner whose mind worked in ways that fascinated him. Our strategy was twofold. First, we had to build an unshakable case proving Titan's claim was fraudulent. Second, we had to expose Reese Dalton as the leak without alerting him that we were onto him. The first part was my domain. I delved into the complex, arcane world of mineral rights law, working late into the night, my apartment walls slowly disappearing behind a new collage of maps and legal briefs. I was building our entire offensive around the specific substance doctrine, a legal argument that a contract granting rights to one type of mineral does not implicitly grant rights to all others. It was a solid but difficult angle, one that would require an immense burden of proof. The second part was Kaylin's. He began a subtle counterintelligence operation, a delicate game of corporate chess. One afternoon, I was grabbing a sandwich in the firm's bustling cafe when I saw him approach Reese near the espresso machine. I watched from a distance as Kaylin, looking stressed and defeated, let slip a piece of carefully crafted misinformation. "This Beaumont case is a nightmare," I overheard him say, his voice just loud enough to seem like a genuine complaint. "Vance has found some obscure precedent about Native American land treaties. It's a total dead end, but we have to waste weeks chasing it down for appearances' sake." Reese offered some insincere condolences, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. 10 minutes later, I saw him in a secluded corner of the cafe, speaking urgently into his phone in a hushed voice. He'd taken the bait. Kalen's ghost was leading him on a wild goose chase. The game was thrilling, but the danger felt ever present. One Tuesday night, while working late in the archives, chasing down a cross-reference in an old property law treatise, a strange feeling washed over me. A chill that had nothing to do with the sub-basement's air conditioning. My eyes drifted to the small, dome-shaped security camera in the corner of the ceiling. For the past week, it had been dormant, a piece of black tape over its lens with a handwritten out-of-order sign. Sal had told me maintenance was waiting on a part, but now the tape was gone, and in its place, a tiny, almost invisible red light was blinking, a single malevolent eye in the gloom. My heart hammered against my ribs. Someone was watching me. My fingers flew across the keyboard of my burner phone. The message to Kalen was simple: compromised, camera active. His reply was instantaneous. Get out now. Leave everything non-essential. Meet at the rendezvous. My mind went into overdrive. I calmly packed my personal items and the decoy research Kalen and I had fabricated, the useless land treaty files, into a separate binder. I left my primary laptop, which contained only superficial work, on the desk. My real research was on a series of encrypted flash drives I kept on my person at all times. As I rode the elevator up, my reflection was a pale, composed stranger. Outside, the night air was cool. As I hailed a cab, a dark, nondescript sedan parked across the street pulled smoothly away from the curb, its headlights off, and disappeared into the flow of traffic. I wasn't just paranoid. I was being followed. The rendezvous was the Alfred Caldwell Lily Pool in Lincoln Park. The hidden urban sanctuary was a world away from the corporate battlefield, a place of serene beauty and deep shadows. Kalen was waiting for me near the prairie-style pavilion, a tall silhouette against the faint city glow. "They know," I said, my voice trembling slightly as I reached him. "Reese knows I've found something real. That camera wasn't just fixed. It was aimed at my desk." Kalen's face was grim, his jaw tight. "It's not just Reese," he said, his voice low and hard. "He's not smart enough to get IT to reactivate a camera for him without a work order. He has a powerful ally, someone inside the firm with the authority to bypass protocols, someone on the board." The implication was chilling, a spiderweb of conspiracy that extended far higher than we thought. "We need to find out who," I insisted. "We have to get into the firm's central server. The executive-level communications are triple encrypted, but there has to be a digital trail." Kalen shook his head, the motion sharp with frustration. "It's impossible, Anne. The server room is a fortress. Access requires credentials that only I and the head of IT, a man loyal to my uncle, have. We'd be caught before we even got through the first firewall." I looked at him, my mind racing back through the mountain of data I'd absorbed since starting here. "When you hired the new cybersecurity team from Stanford last year," I said, the memory clicking into place, "you brought in a white-hat hacker to do a full system penetration test. I read the report." Kalen stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. "You read a confidential, board-level cybersecurity report." I shrugged, a small, defiant gesture. "Like I said, I review everything." She found a backdoor in the legacy server code from the 1990s, an architectural flaw in the original system my father's team built. The firm patched the specific vulnerability, but the report stated the underlying architectural weakness might still be exploitable. He continued to stare at me, but the frustration in his eyes was slowly being replaced by something else. A slow smile spread across his face, a look of pure, unadulterated astonishment. He let out a low laugh, a sound of genuine admiration that seemed to echo in the quiet park. "Anne Vance," he said, shaking his head as if to clear it. "You are going to be the death of them." He paused, his smile fading into a look of grim determination. "Or me." That night, standing in the shadows of the lily pool, our conversation shifted. We weren't just fighting a case anymore. We were planning a heist. Breaking into our own firm's server felt like performing surgery on a sleeping dragon. The Sterling and Sterling Tower, a beacon of commerce and power by day, was a cavernous, silent tomb at 2 in the morning. Kalen led the way, his movements precise and economical, a ghost in his own kingdom. He swiped his executive access card, the electronic beep echoing unnervingly in the empty marble lobby. The security guard at the main desk, a man named Frank who usually gave me a friendly nod, was conveniently reassigned to a different post for the night, a small exertion of CEO privilege. The server room was in the 3rd sub-basement, encased in concrete and protected by a series of biometric locks. Kalen placed his thumb on a scanner, then his palm, each stage punctuated by a soft, permissive chime. The final heavy, insulated door hissed open, revealing a room that was a world unto itself. A blast of frigid, recycled air hit me, carrying the clean, sterile scent of ozone. The room was a dark sanctuary, the only light coming from the thousands of tiny, blinking LEDs on the server racks, a digital constellation humming with the firm's collective secrets. My role was to exploit the legacy code vulnerability I'd found in the cybersecurity report. Kalen's was to stand guard, monitor the building's internal security feeds on a tablet, and use his administrative credentials to bypass any firewalls I couldn't crack. My personal analysis of the moment was surreal. The man whose pants I'd ripped, a man who represented the very pinnacle of the system I was trying to join, was now my partner in what was very likely a federal crime. "You ready for this, Anne?" Kalen's voice was a low murmur beside me, his presence a solid anchor in the disorienting, humming darkness. "No," I admitted honestly, pulling a lightweight laptop from my bag and connecting to a physical port. "Let's do it anyway." The tension was unbearable. Every line of code I wrote felt like a footstep in a minefield. The system was a fortress, designed by Kalen's father's original team and retrofitted over the years with layers of modern security. It was a digital ghost, and I was trying to dance with it without waking it up. Twice, I hit a sub-level firewall that began a silent countdown to a system-wide alert. "Firewall, Section 7B, I hissed, my fingers flying. "I'm on it," Kalen responded instantly, typing his override credentials into the tablet. The countdown vanished. "You've got a 90-second window." After 2 hours of this tense, digital ballet, my body thrumming with caffeine and adrenaline, I was in. A simple command prompt glowed on my screen, a humble gateway to the firm's most protected sanctum. I had bypassed the main security and was now staring at the encrypted executive email archives. I initiated a search algorithm, my fingers slick with sweat as I typed in the keywords: Titan, Beaumont, Rare Earth, and the name of Titan's CEO, Marcus Thorne. As the search algorithm churned through terabytes of data, a slow, agonizing process, Kalen moved to stand directly behind me, watching the progress bar on my screen. His presence was a strange mix of calming and electrifying. I was intensely aware of how close he was, the faint, clean scent of his cologne cutting through the sterile air, the warmth radiating from him in the cold room. In this small, humming space, we were the only 2 people in the world, bound by a dangerous secret. The results populated the screen, my breath caught in my throat. The first hits were exactly what we expected, a chain of covertly worded emails between Reese Dalton and Titan's lead counsel, confirming beyond any doubt that he was the leak. He'd been feeding them information for months. "We got him," I whispered, a feeling of grim satisfaction washing over me. Keep looking, Kalen said, his voice tight. There's more. He was right. There was another chain, far more shocking, flagged by my algorithm for its heavy, multi-layered encryption. It took another 10 minutes for my decryption script to crack it. The messages were between Reese and another board member, someone using a code name, Orion. My blood ran cold. I ran the sender's unique digital signature against the firm's executive directory. The name that flashed on the screen felt like a physical blow. Orion Sterling, Kalen's uncle. The emails, stripped of their encryption, laid out the entire, breathtakingly cynical conspiracy. Orion, believing his brother had cheated him out of his rightful place as the firm's leader, had orchestrated the entire thing. He had leaked the information about the minerals to Titan through Reese. He had coached Reese on how to undermine Kalen's authority, and he was planning to use the fallout from the failed Beaumont case, combined with the loss of the Ishikawa deal, to stage a vote of no confidence and seize control of the firm from Kalen. Orion, Kalen whispered, the name a ragged, broken sound. My father's own brother. He looked utterly devastated, the color draining from his face. In that moment, he wasn't a CEO, he was just a man who had been profoundly and irrevocably stabbed in the back by his own family. I saw the immense weight he carried, the crushing loneliness of his position. An impulse, born of compassion and the strange intimacy of our shared secret, made me reach out and place my hand on his arm. The muscle beneath his suit jacket was coiled tight with tension. We have him now, Kalen, I said softly. We have the proof. He looked down at my hand, then up at me, his stormy eyes filled with a raw vulnerability I'd never seen before. The space between us crackled with an energy that had nothing to do with the humming servers. The professional lines we had so carefully maintained blurred and then vanished completely. He leaned in, his gaze fixed on my lips, and for a heart-stopping second, the entire world narrowed to the small space between us. Suddenly, a glaring red alert box flashed on my screen, its shrill digital beep slicing through the moment. Unauthorized access detected. System lockdown initiated. 60 seconds. Orion must have had a silent tripwire on his files, a digital canary in a coal mine. We have to go, Kalen said, his voice snapping back to urgent command. Now, download everything you can. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I jammed a secure, high-speed thumb drive into the laptop's port and initiated a rapid data transfer. The countdown timer on the screen was a digital heartbeat counting down to our discovery. 59, 58, 57. The progress bar for the download crawled across the screen with agonizing slowness. It's not going to make it, I said, my voice strained. It will, Kalen insisted, his hand now on my shoulder, a firm, steadying pressure. At 5 seconds, the download completed. I ripped the drive out, shoved the laptop in my bag, and triggered a script to wipe our digital footprints from the local terminal logs. Just as the timer hit 0 and the building's internal alarms began to blare with a deafening klaxon, we sprinted from the room. We had the evidence, but we had also tipped our hand. The ghost in the machine was now hunting us. The aftermath of the heist was a week of suffocating paranoia. We had the evidence. A digital dagger stored on an encrypted thumb drive that I now kept with me at all times. But Orion and Reese knew someone had been in the system. They didn't know who or what we had taken, but the beast had been wounded, and it was now lashing out in the dark. The atmosphere at the firm turned toxic overnight. Orion called an emergency board meeting the next morning to discuss the deplorable security breach. I watched the live feed from my basement desk, my heart a cold stone in my chest. His performance of outrage was worthy of an Oscar. He spoke of the sanctity of their clients' data, of the trust that had been violated, his voice trembling with manufactured fury. He used the incident to push for stricter controls, effectively turning the firm his brother had built into a surveillance state. The changes were immediate and invasive. New security protocols were implemented. Keycard access was required for every hallway. Our work computers were updated with monitoring software that tracked every keystroke, and a swarm of IT personnel, all handpicked by the firm's head of IT, a man notoriously loyal to Orion, descended upon the building. They were everywhere, their presence a constant, unnerving reminder that the walls now had ears. I could feel their eyes on me in the archives. Twice, an IT tech came down to recalibrate the climate control sensors, his gaze lingering on my desk setup for too long. Reese would make a point to walk by my corner of the sub-basement, a predatory smile on his face. Heard there was a little break-in, he remarked one afternoon, leaning against a shelf of case files. Must be some rats in the basement. We'll have to call an exterminator. He winked and walked away, leaving his threat hanging in the cold, still air. Kalen was under immense pressure. Orion was using the breach to paint him as a weak and incompetent leader, unable to protect the firm's most valuable secrets. The narrative was taking hold. I saw the whispers in the hallways, the worried looks from other partners. Orion was methodically isolating him, just as he'd planned. Our secret meetings became more difficult, more dangerous. We couldn't risk meeting at the office or any of our usual spots. Kalen sent me a coded message with a time and a place. The next afternoon, I found myself slipping into the cavernous, almost empty auditorium of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra during a daytime rehearsal. The musicians were on stage, a scattered collection of artists lost in their craft. A lone pianist was practicing a Rachmaninoff concerto, the notes cascading through the vast space, a melody that was beautiful, tragic, and powerful all at once. It was a fitting soundtrack to our situation. I found Kalen sitting in the shadows of the upper balcony, his gaze fixed on the stage. He looked exhausted, the strain of the past week etched into the lines around his eyes. "He's boxing me in," Kalen said without preamble as I sat down, his voice a low murmur beneath the swell of the piano. "I just came from a preliminary board meeting. He's going to call for a vote of no confidence at the annual shareholders meeting in 2 weeks. He'll use the loss of the Ishikawa deal and now this security breach as justification to remove me." My own commentary was that we were running out of time. The clock was ticking down to our execution. Our original plan to use the evidence to win the Beaumont case and expose the fraud was no longer enough. It would take months to get to trial. By then, it would be too late. Then we changed the battlefield, I said, my voice firm. We don't present this at the Beaumont hearing, we present it at the shareholders' meeting. We let him build his gallows, and then we spring the trap. We turn his coup into his public execution. Kalen turned to look at me, a glimmer of his old fire returning to his eyes. The dramatic chords of the piano filled the silence between us. "It's a massive risk," he said. "The board is spooked. If we present this and they don't believe us, if there's any doubt, we're not just fired. We'll be disbarred for corporate espionage and theft of data. Orion will bury us. What choice do we have?" I countered, my voice rising with the music. "He's coming for your father's legacy, Kalen. He's coming for everything you've tried to protect, for the community in Beaumont. We can't let him win." The conversation shifted, the strategic edge softening into something more personal. "Why are you doing this, Anne?" he asked quietly, the music swirling around us. "This isn't your fight. After that first day, you could have just walked away and no one would have blamed you." I thought for a moment, the pianist on stage reaching a soft, contemplative passage. "Because the first day I met you, after the incident, you could have destroyed me," I said, meeting his gaze. "You had every right, but you didn't. You saw something else. And because I looked him straight in the eye, my voice clear and certain, I don't like bullies, whether they are on the playground or in the boardroom. He reached across the small space between our velvet seats and took my hand. His touch was warm and firm, sending a jolt through me that had nothing to do with fear or adrenaline. It wasn't a romantic gesture, not yet. It was a gesture of solidarity, of profound, shared understanding. "My father would have liked you," he said softly, his thumb gently brushing against my knuckles. "He always said the firm needed more heart." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the music crescendo around us, our hands clasped together. In that vast, empty hall, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 performances, we were two lonely souls who had found an unlikely anchor in each other. The plan was set. We had 2 weeks to prepare for the fight of our lives. The 2 weeks leading up to the shareholders' meeting were the most intense, exhausting, and strangely exhilarating of my life. We operated like a two-person insurgency, waging a silent war from the firm's highest and lowest floors. My days were spent in the archives, a ghost haunting the stacks. But I was no longer a prisoner. I was a general in my war room. I built an airtight legal argument for the Beaumont case, crafting it not just for a judge, but for a jury of skeptical, powerful shareholders. It had to be more than sound. It had to be a compelling story, a narrative of justice that was impossible to ignore. Kalen, meanwhile, worked his own magic from the penthouse suite. He moved through the upper echelons of the firm with a newfound, subtle purpose. I'd hear whispers of his movements. A seemingly casual lunch with a notoriously indecisive board member, a junior executive known for his integrity, suddenly promoted to a position overseeing internal audits. He was quietly moving his chess pieces into place, creating a small network of allies he could trust when the time came. He also secretly reached out to Martha Beaumont and the community leaders, preparing them for the bombshell that was about to drop, his calls filled with a compassion and reassurance that I never would have thought him capable of. Our late-night strategy sessions in his office became the focal point of my existence. The city lights spread out below us, a silent audience to our conspiracy. Surrounded by half-empty takeout containers and stacks of legal documents, the professional and the personal began to blur in a way that was both terrifying and intoxicating. We'd argue over the phrasing of a slide 1 minute, our minds locked in a thrilling intellectual dance, and the next, a shared, weary silence would fall. "Is that a picture of your parents?" he asked one night, nodding toward the background on my laptop. "Yeah," I replied, a small, sad smile touching my lips. "They were history professors. They always told me to look for the story behind the facts." "They were right," he said softly. His gaze was distant. "My father always said to hide the story behind the facts, to build a wall of data so high no one could see the man behind it." In those moments, I learned about the immense pressure he'd faced his whole life. The constant, crushing comparisons to his brilliant, enigmatic father. He, in turn, learned about my scholarship-funded education, my constant, gnawing feeling of being an outsider, and my deep-seated need to prove that I belonged. "You don't need to prove anything, Anne," he told me once, his voice serious. "You've already proven it." The night before the final pre-meeting brief, the air in his office was thick with exhaustion and adrenaline. We were mapping out the final, critical section of the presentation. "This is it," I said, pointing to the slide that would detail Orion's encrypted emails. The text was stark against the dark background. "This is the kill shot." Kalen was quiet, staring at the screen, his face pale in the glow of the monitor. "He's my family, Anne," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "He taught me how to ride a bike. He was there when my father died, no matter what he's done." I saw the raw pain in his eyes, the brutal conflict tearing him apart. I walked over and stood beside him, my shoulder almost brushing his. "You're not the one who broke that bond, Kalen," I said gently. He did, you're just holding him accountable. He looked at me and the air between us grew thick with a decade's worth of unspoken emotions. The silence was charged, electric. I couldn't have done any of this without you, he said, his voice husky. You came into this firm and you ripped everything apart, starting with my pants, and you put it all back together the right way. He stepped closer, his stormy eyes searching mine, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. He started to say something, the word heavy with a meaning that made my heart ache. He stopped, shaking his head slightly, as if the words were too heavy, too dangerous to speak. The moment was broken by the sharp, frantic buzz of his phone on the desk. He flinched, snapping back to reality, and answered it, his expression hardening as he listened. Martha, slow down, what is it? He was silent for a moment, his face turning to stone. What, Judge? I see, and they're coming when? He listened, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the phone. Don't do anything to provoke them. Just gather everyone. I'm on my way. He hung up, his movements sharp and precise. It was Martha Beaumont, he said, his voice turning to ice. Titan Energy got wind that something was happening. They found a judge in their pocket to grant an emergency injunction to seize the property for a preliminary environmental survey. She says they're sending in bulldozers. At dawn, my blood ran cold. The timing was too perfect, too destructive. He's making his move, Kaylin bit out, the words like chips of ice. Orion is trying to destroy the evidence, the land itself, before the meeting. He's not just trying to take the firm, he's trying to erase the crime. My personal analysis was swift and certain. This was the final, desperate gambit. They were trying to make the entire case moot. We have to stop them, I said, my voice ringing with a conviction that surprised even me. We have to go there now. Kaylin didn't hesitate. He was already shrugging on his suit jacket, his eyes blazing with a cold, controlled fury. Get your coat, he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. We're going to West Virginia. The legal battle had just become a physical one. The drive to West Virginia was a frantic, 10-hour blur through the night, a desperate race against the rising sun. Kaylin drove his sleek, dark sedan with a focused intensity, the city lights of Chicago giving way to the inky blackness of the interstate. The car became our mobile command center, a capsule of tense energy hurtling through the darkness. Kaylin was on the phone almost constantly, his voice a low, commanding hum. He coordinated with a network of contacts I never knew he had. A constitutional lawyer in Charleston, a handful of independent journalists who owed him favors, and of course, Martha Beaumont and the community leaders. No, Martha, do not engage. I heard him say, his tone firm but gentle. Just be present. Form a line. This is about peaceful resistance, nothing more. We'll handle the legal fight. Meanwhile, I was in the passenger seat, my laptop balanced on my knees, the screen's glow illuminating my face. My fingers flew across the keyboard, drafting the language for an emergency temporary restraining order. I delved into the dense, complex text of federal mining regulations, the words blurring together under the rhythmic sweep of the highway lights. Amidst the chaos, there was a moment when he ended a call and a rare silence filled the car. He glanced over at me, at my intense focus, the laptop light reflecting in my glasses. He didn't say anything, but a look of profound, weary understanding passed between us. We were no longer CEO and intern. We were soldiers in the same trench, and the battle was just hours away. We arrived just before dawn, the first pale gray light beginning to silhouette the ancient, rolling peaks of the Appalachian Mountains. The scene at the base of the access road to the Beaumont property was tense, a tableau of simmering conflict. A line of massive, yellow bulldozers and heavy machinery from Titan Energy was parked like a mechanical army, their diesel engines rumbling, a low, guttural threat that vibrated through the ground. Facing them was a human wall. A line of about 100 men, women, and children from the community stood silently, their shoulders squared. They held handmade signs, "This is our home, no trespassing, Titan go home." It was a scene straight out of a history book, a raw and powerful display of defiance. At the front of the line stood Martha Beaumont, a woman whose small, stooped frame seemed to contain the strength of the mountains themselves. Kaylin and I walked to the front of the line, and she gave him a brief, grateful nod. Reese Dalton was there, standing with the Titan foreman, a burly man with a hard face and a reflective vest. Reese looked smug, utterly confident in his victory. "Sterling," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Come all this way to watch the show? A bit outside your jurisdiction, isn't it?" Kaylin ignored him completely, his focus entirely on the foreman. "This is private property, and you are trespassing," Kaylin stated, his voice calm but carrying an authority that made the air feel heavy. "Your injunction is based on a fraudulent claim, and we will prove it. I'm telling you once, turn these machines around." The foreman let out a short, harsh laugh. "I don't know who you think you are, buddy, but I've got a court order right here that says otherwise," he said, patting a folder tucked under his arm. "You and these folks have 5 minutes to clear the road before I have every last one of you arrested for obstruction." This was the moment. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. I had spent weeks in a silent basement with paper and theories. This was real. These were people's homes, their lives. The fear was a cold knot in my stomach, but the anger was a fire that burned it away. I stepped forward. "Actually," I said, my voice ringing out, clear and louder than I expected in the misty morning air, "your court order is invalid." Reese and the foreman both turned to stare at me, their expressions a mixture of shock and contempt. I held up my phone, its screen glowing. It was live streaming to the network of independent journalists Kaylin had contacted. A small red icon indicated over 1,000 people were already watching. Under the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act of 1977, I declared, my voice gaining strength with every word, any mining activity requires a 30-day public comment period and a full environmental impact statement, neither of which you have filed for the extraction of metallic elements. Your current permit is for coal. By bringing this equipment onto this property with the intent to excavate for substances not covered by your permit, you are committing federal fraud on camera. Reese's face went pale, the smug certainty draining away, replaced by a flicker of panic. The foreman looked confused, glancing at Reese for guidance. A low murmur of hope rippled through the line of community members, and a few of them began to cheer. Kaylin stood beside me, his posture radiating a fierce, unwavering pride. Furthermore, Kaylin added, his CEO voice booming across the field, silencing the crowd, "I am the majority trustee of the land trust that legally owns this property. And as of 1 hour ago, I have filed a countersuit in federal court against Titan Energy and its executive officers for corporate fraud, citing evidence of a multi-decade conspiracy to defraud my firm, this community, and our shareholders." He looked directly at Reese, his eyes like chips of ice. "A conspiracy aided by members of my own firm, who will be facing immediate legal and professional consequences." The standoff was broken by the wail of sirens. 2 state police cars came speeding up the road, their lights flashing, painting the tense scene in strobing blues and reds. The community fell silent, a wave of fear passing through them, but the officers didn't come for the protesters. A stern-faced state trooper got out, walked past us, and approached the Titan foreman. He handed the man a document. It was the temporary restraining order, filed by me electronically an hour ago and fast-tracked by Kaylin's legal contact. It halted all activity on the property, effective immediately, pending the outcome of our fraud case. We had won the battle. The foreman read the order, his face slack with disbelief. With a curse and a final, defeated gesture, he signaled to his crew. One by one, the low, threatening rumble of the bulldozer engines died, replaced by a sudden, beautiful silence. The community erupted in a joyous, cathartic roar of celebration. In the middle of the joyous chaos, as people hugged and cried, Kaylin turned to me. The morning sun was finally breaking over the Appalachian Mountains, casting a brilliant golden glow over the valley. "You were magnificent," he said, his voice filled with an emotion I couldn't quite name. And then, right there, in front of everyone, surrounded by the very people whose homes we had just saved, he cupped my face in his hands and kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of frantic passion, but one of profound gratitude, of shared victory, of deep and overwhelming respect. It was a promise of everything that was to come, a seal on the alliance we had forged in shadow and now brought into the light. The war, however, was far from over. We still had to face Orion. The return from West Virginia was the quietest 10 hours of my life. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a strange, hollow sense of calm. We had won the battle, but the war awaited us in a sterile, air-conditioned auditorium. We barely spoke, the unspoken weight of the coming confrontation filling the car. In the moments before we arrived at the firm, in a quiet underground parking garage, Kaylin turned to me. He had his CEO armor back on, the perfect suit, the impassive expression, but I could see the fatigue in his eyes, the slight tremor in the hand that rested on the steering wheel. "Are you ready for this, Anne?" he asked, his voice low. I looked at him, at the man who had stood with me in a misty Appalachian dawn, and felt a surge of unwavering certainty. "I've been ready since the day I read that file," I replied. A small, grateful smile touched his lips, and we went upstairs to face his family. The Sterling and Sterling annual shareholders meeting was held in a vast, sterile auditorium that felt more like a surgical theater. The tiered rows of seats were filled with the city's financial elite, a sea of expensive suits and calculated expressions. The air was thick with tension, a low hum of anxious whispers. On the stage, a long table was set for the board members. Orion Sterling sat at one end, the patriarch, looking confident and in complete control, greeting other board members with a warm, disarming smile. Kaylin sat at the opposite end, an island of stillness, looking calm, but I was close enough to see the rigid set of his jaw. I was seated in the front row, my nameplate reading E. Vance, Junior Counsel. I was officially there to take minutes. Unofficially, I was the secret weapon, the encrypted thumb drive in my pocket feeling as heavy as a stone. Orion began the meeting, his voice smooth and practiced, the embodiment of seasoned authority. He detailed the firm's successes over the past fiscal year, his words painting a picture of stability and strength. Then he pivoted, his tone turning grave and sorrowful. He spoke of the unfortunate but telling loss of the Ishikawa deal, the alarming and deeply concerning security breach, and a disturbing lack of decisive leadership in the face of these challenges. It was a masterclass in corporate assassination, delivered with the regretful air of a man forced to do his solemn duty. He was praising his late brother's legacy, while simultaneously implying Kaylin was squandering it. I watched the board members. A few, clearly in Orion's camp, nodded along with grim understanding. Others looked uncomfortable, their eyes shifting towards Kaylin, who remained impassive. Finally, Orion delivered the killing blow. "It is with a heavy heart," he announced, his voice resonating with false emotion, "that I must call for a vote of no confidence in Kaylin Sterling as Chief Executive Officer." A shocked gasp rippled through the auditorium. This wasn't just a corporate maneuver, it was a public declaration of war. As the board members began to murmur amongst themselves, shuffling papers to cast their votes, Kalen stood up. "Before you cast your votes," he said, his voice ringing out, calm and clear, cutting through the noise. The room fell silent. "There is one more piece of business to discuss, the Beaumont case." A confused murmur went through the crowd. Orion scoffed, a look of theatrical disbelief on his face. "Kalen, please," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "This is hardly the time for pro bono publicity stunts. We're discussing the future of the firm." "On the contrary," Kalen replied, his stormy eyes locking with his uncle's across the long table. "This case is at the very heart of who we are as a firm. It's a case about legacy, about fraud, and about a conspiracy to defraud this very board, orchestrated from within this room." That was my cue. All eyes turned to me as I stood and walked to the podium at the side of the stage. My heart was a frantic drum, but my steps were steady. I connected my laptop, and the presentation I had spent the last 2 weeks perfecting flashed onto the massive screens behind the board. I started not with data, but with a story. I showed them a black-and-white photograph of the Beaumont family from the 1930s, their faces proud and hopeful. I told them about the land, about the community. Then I walked them through the legal battle, the fraudulent contract, the discovery of the rare earth minerals. I played a short, professionally edited video clip, footage from the live stream of the standoff in West Virginia. The shareholders watched in stunned silence the image of the massive Titan bulldozers facing down a line of farmers, with Reese Dalton standing smugly in the foreground. Then came the kill shot. "The question," I said, my voice echoing in the silent room, "is how did Titan Energy know to pursue this dead case with such aggression?" The answer was found in our own servers. The encrypted emails between Orion and Reese appeared on the screen. I had decrypted and highlighted the most damning phrases. The conversations detailed their entire plot. Orion leaking his brother's secret knowledge of the minerals to Titan, coaching Reese to sabotage Kalen, and their plan to oust him and sell the Beaumont mineral rights for a massive, shared profit. Father sentimentality is a liability we can discard. One of Orion's emails read, "The auditorium was utterly, profoundly silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet." Orion's face, once a mask of confident control, had turned a mottled, furious red. Reese Dalton, sitting in the third row, looked like he was about to be physically ill, his skin a ghastly shade of pale green. "These are fabrications," Orion finally roared, slamming his fist on the table and lurching to his feet. "Lies, this is slander of the highest order." "Are they?" Kalen asked calmly. He stood and placed a thick, bound document on the table. "This is a certified copy of the server logs, notarized this morning, and this evidence has already been submitted to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Securities and Exchange Commission." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the board. "I believe you'll both be hearing from them shortly." The vote of no confidence was forgotten. Instead, the board, their faces a mixture of horror and fury, held an immediate, unanimous vote to remove Orion Sterling from his position and to terminate Reese Dalton's employment, effective immediately. 2 stern-faced security guards entered the auditorium and escorted a sputtering, defeated Orion and a shell-shocked Reese from the room, their public humiliation absolute and final. The meeting ended with a thunderous standing ovation for Kalen. He had not only saved his position, but he had purged the corruption from his father's firm and in doing so truly honored his legacy. As the room cleared and the excited buzz of conversation faded, Kalen walked over to me at the podium. The relief in his eyes was palpable, but there was something else there too, something deeper and more profound. He looked at me not as a CEO or a boss, but as a partner. "We did it," he said, his voice soft. I smiled, a real, unburdened smile that reached my eyes. "Yes," I said, "we did. The war was finally over. In the weeks that followed, the firm was reborn. The oppressive, toxic cloud of paranoia lifted, replaced by a current of fresh, collaborative energy. The story of the Beaumont case and Orion's treachery became a corporate legend, whispered in the hallways not as gossip, but as a founding myth for a new era. Kalen, now free from the shadows of his father and uncle, led with a new kind of strength, one built on transparency and integrity, not just the perception of control. He was still the formidable CEO, but the ice in his veins had thawed. I once saw him in the cafe, laughing, a genuine, unburdened laugh, with a group of first-year associates, and the sight was so unexpected it nearly made me drop my coffee. The Beaumont community, with the firm's full and unwavering backing, established a community-owned trust to manage the mineral rights, ensuring their prosperity for generations. Martha Beaumont would call me once a week, her warm, crackling voice a welcome respite from the complexities of corporate law. "You're one of us now, Anne," she'd told me. "You ever get tired of that city, there's a porch swing with your name on it here." My own life was unrecognizable. I was no longer the intern in the basement. Kalen had promoted me to a full associate, bypassing the usual 2-year program. My name was now on an office door on the 48th floor, with a view that stretched all the way to Lake Michigan. Maya, my former bullpen neighbor, had stopped by on my first day, a rare, genuine smile on her face. "Okay, Vance," she'd said, shaking her head in disbelief. "You win. Just try not to rip the pants off any visiting dignitaries." Even Sal, the archivist, had sent a single, perfect orchid to my new office, the same type as the one in Kalen's, with a simple, handwritten card that read, "Knew you'd make it out." But the biggest change was between us. The secret alliance, forged in shadows and sealed with a kiss in a sun-drenched Appalachian Valley, had blossomed into an open, undefined partnership. The stolen glances became shared smiles across the boardroom table. The late-night work sessions, once fueled by adrenaline and caffeine, turned into late-night dinners, fueled by good food and even better conversation. We were in a strange, exhilarating limbo, a space between colleagues and something more, and we were both content for a time to simply exist there. "So, let me get this straight," Chloe had said one night as we shared a bottle of wine in our apartment. I had finally told her everything. "You accidentally assaulted your billionaire CEO boss, uncovered a multi-generational corporate conspiracy, took down his evil uncle in a public showdown, saved a small town, and now you're—" "What?" "His star employee who he also makes hard ties at." That about sums it up, I admitted, a blush creeping up my neck. "Okay, main character energy," she said, raising her glass. "So when's the wedding?" "Don't be ridiculous," I laughed, but her question echoed in my mind. Where was this going? One evening, a month after the shareholders' meeting, Kalen asked me to stay late. There was a nervous energy about him I'd never seen before, a slight awkwardness in his movements that was entirely out of character. His office, once a place of terror and judgment for me, now felt like a sanctuary, the one place in the world where I felt completely understood. "I need your opinion on a document," he said, his voice a little too formal. "It's a new kind of contract. I'm not sure about the language." He didn't say anything else. He just handed me a single, beautiful, leather-bound document. The paper was thick and creamy, the text printed in an elegant, classic font. I opened it. The title read, "Lifetime Partnership Agreement." My heart skipped a beat. I thought it was a formal, albeit strangely named, job offer, a contract solidifying my new position at the firm. But as I began to read the clauses, I realized it was something else entirely. Clause 1. The parties, hereafter referred to as Kalen Sterling, the party of the first part, and Ann Vance, the party of the second part, agree to enter into a lifetime partnership, based on mutual respect, shared intellectual curiosity, and an undeniable attraction that survived ripped trousers, corporate conspiracies, and potential federal fraud. Clause 2. The party of the first part, Kaylin Sterling, commits to a lifetime of valuing the party of the second parts, Ann Vance's, counsel above all others, to never again doubt the structural integrity of his trousers in a crisis, to provide an endless supply of high-quality coffee and unwavering support, and to defer to her judgment on all matters relating to hazardous Persian rugs. Clause 3. The party of the second part, Ann Vance, agrees to continue challenging, surprising, and saving the party of the first part, Kaylin Sterling, from himself, and to accept the position as his equal partner, in law, in strategy, in life, and in love, effective immediately and lasting for all of eternity. I looked up from the document, my vision blurring as tears welled in my eyes. Kaylin was standing in front of me, no longer behind his desk, no longer the CEO, but the man I had come to know, his stormy eyes soft and full of a vulnerable hope. He was holding a small, black velvet box. "This contract is non-negotiable," he said, his voice soft and a little shaky. "But I'm hoping you'll sign anyway." He opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, was a simple, elegant ring with a single, clear, brilliant-cut diamond. "The fine print," he said, a small, nervous smile playing on his lips as he got down on one knee, "is that you have to marry me." My personal commentary, my final analysis, was that my life was never going to be one of quiet achievements. It was going to be loud and challenging and brilliant. I thought back to that very first day, the mortifying sound of tearing fabric that I thought had ended my life before it began. It wasn't the sound of a legacy ripping apart. It was the sound of my real life beginning. "Objection," I whispered, a single tear tracing a path down my cheek as I laughed. He looked momentarily panicked. "On what grounds?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. I smiled, closing the distance between us and kneeling down in front of him. "You've left no room for amendments," I said softly. I took the document from his hand and the pen from his desk. At the bottom of the page, on the signature line next to his, I signed my name, and right next to it I wrote, "Sustained and yes." It's funny. For my entire life, I thought my story would be written in the quiet rustle of turning pages, in the neat, orderly lines of a legal brief. I never imagined the most important sound in my life would be the sound of tearing fabric. That sharp, horrifying rip wasn't just the sound of a seam giving way. It was the sound of my meticulously planned life breaking apart to make room for the one I was actually meant to live. Looking back, the lessons I learned weren't taught in any law school. The first and most important is that your greatest perceived weaknesses often hide your most unique strengths. Everything that made me feel like an outsider at Sterling and Sterling, my social anxiety, my imposter syndrome, my obsessive need to overprepare and analyze every system to feel in control, turned out to be my greatest assets. My anxiety forced me to be observant. My imposter syndrome fueled a work ethic that left no stone unturned. So, I'd ask you, what are the things you've been told are your flaws? Have you ever considered they might be your superpowers in disguise? The second thing I learned is that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the presence of preparation. When I stood in that office, waiting for Kaylin to fire me, I was terrified. But when he challenged me, I didn't respond with an emotional plea. I responded with facts from a facility's log. I fell back on my research. Fear is a powerful emotion, but it's often deafened by the clear, quiet voice of knowledge. And finally, I learned that the most important alliances we make are often the ones that make the least sense on paper. Kaylin and I started as adversaries, a CEO and the intern who humiliated him. But our partnership was forged in a shared purpose, and a mutual respect that grew from seeing the person behind the title, the vulnerability behind the armor. It makes you wonder how many potential allies we walk past every day, simply because we've already judged them based on the cover. If there's one thing this whole insane, beautiful, terrifying journey has taught me, it's this. Life's most important contracts are never written on paper. They are signed in moments of vulnerability, sealed with trust, and enforced by character. So, what do you think? Have you ever had a moment of total disaster that, looking back, actually changed your life for the better? I'd love to hear your story. Black Circle, if this story made you think about your own journey, leave a comment. Black Circle, if you believe our weaknesses can truly be our strengths, please share your thoughts in the comments. Black Circle, if you enjoy stories that explore the messy, unexpected, and beautiful turns life can take, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next.